Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, a genocide that is continuing today under Putin, backed by Iran and North Korea and China, which is why we must ensure that Ukraine has everything it needs right now to push Russia out, liberate the occupied territories from sadistic Stalinist occupation, and win this global war of democracy versus fascism for all of us. I mean, this should be, it cannot be clearer. This is a black and white battle between good versus evil. And it's bipartisan. So if you want to help Ukraine win, please go to helpukrainewin.com, an urgent SOS site built by a Gaslit Nation listener where you can easily contact your reps directly through helpukrainewin.com. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who came to the Gaslit Nation Make Art Workshop, the business side of things. That event ended up being 2 hours long and finally ended when my kids crashed the party, refusing to go to bed. So we could have kept going. So look out for a recording of that workshop along with the transcript and links to the resources referenced throughout. That will be publishing Saturday, May 4th to give us some time to prepare, given all the big breaking news. In the meantime, we're launching a chat group called Art is Survival for artists and people who love artists and want to cheer them on. That will be exclusive to our Patreon community. This idea came out of our Q&A discussion as people shared their projects, what they're working on, what they needed help with. So to keep that conversation going and have a resource, a community for all of us artists out there, trying to stay grounded in our work and find meaning in community, we're launching this group chat. This idea came out of our Q&A discussion as people were sharing their projects, what they needed help with, what they're hoping to accomplish. So to keep that conversation going, we are creating this chat group, Art is Survival, to give us a place to share resources, ideas, encouragement, and just generally nerd out. I'm going to be in there posting about my projects, including opera, since I have a film script that's very personal to me that currently features Puccini's Tosca as a character. So if you want to learn more about that and all the fun stuff we're all working on, us little artists, us big, powerful artists in the world, join the Art is Survival chat group. Be sure to subscribe to the show on patreon.com/gaslit at the truth teller level and higher to get access to that. And as well as our big general chat group where all of us just sort of hang out and share what we're reading, share our reactions to what's going on in the news. We're going to be having, oh God, help us. We're going to be having convention watch parties in the big general chat group. We're going to be helping each other with getting out the vote. We're going to be sharing whatever general stuff we're working on or thinking about in the larger chat group. But now we have an extra chat group just devoted to the artists in our community and those who love the artists in our community. And that is Art is Survival. And that is launching with this episode. And again, this idea came out organically through the Make Art workshop we had last week, which was wonderful. I learned so much from the folks that shared what they're working on. It was very inspiring to hear from you all. It's very cool. We have an incredible global community of listeners. You are not alone out there listening to Gaslit Nation. You have some remarkable people who are beside you listening to this show, very aware of what's going on and very aware of where the solutions are on how we overcome this and playing the long game and linking arms and refusing to abandon each other. And I love you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are going to be covering the big news of the weekend, Iran attacking Israel with a swarm of drones and missiles, and the U.S. leading a coalition of allies to block the vast majority from the sky, saving the lives of countless civilians, homes, buildings, and critical infrastructure. As Biden takes a victory lap over this, Ukrainian civilians are watching and going, wait, wait a minute, why can't the U.S. do that for us? Meanwhile, the largest electricity plant just got destroyed in Kyiv. All right, so again, we are doing the bare minimum for Ukraine. So much more can be done. We'll be covering more on the rising tensions as Netanyahu desperately needs his forever war to cling to power. what these latest rising tensions mean, where things are headed in this week's bonus show publishing Saturday. And that show will include a look at Paul Manafort in the 2024 election. Yes, Paul Manafort is back because he never left. And Trump needs his old loyal buddy who refused to flip on him and even went to prison for him, which is like catnip to dictator mafia boss Trump. So more on all that Saturday. That is a bonus show exclusive to our Patreon subscribers at the Truth Teller level or higher. And if you're not there with us, sign up at patreon.com/gaslit, get bonus shows, fun chats, and more. And we'll be working on more live tapings and fun things later in the spring. Now, running this week is one of the most important interviews we've ever produced here at Gaslit Nation. You've heard me talk a lot about the rise of Christian nationalism. That's how Putin consolidated power. That's how Orban staged a comeback and has entrenched himself in power. So the Christian nationalists here, they see Trump as their savior, quite literally. They really do believe that they're living end times prophecy, and that's part of the excitement of Trump. That's part of why his base is on fire, why there's so much energy for Trump. You have to watch this documentary, Bad Faith. We have this week on the show the filmmaker behind it, Stephen Ujlaki, a producer of over 25 feature films, who has served as the dean of the Loyola Marymount University School of Film and Television. This is an episode you're going to want to send to your family and friends so that they understand Christian nationalism is an urgent threat to our democracy. It seems too insane to be true, but this has been a 40-year plus long game reaction by white supremacy in America to civil rights. They lost the civil rights movement. They saw women's liberation rising, and the white patriarchy oligarchs organized. They've been playing the long game, and the Democrats have had no answer for this because they've been taking money from the same corporate donors. That's where we are. And ever since the blue wave of 2018, we've been desperately playing catch up against this 40-year plan by the Koch brothers political network and others like the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, which is a very real plan to mass purge the United States government and ensure that the DOJ and the FBI are the personal security services of the President of the United States, and that any American or any person on U.S. soil can be hit with the Insurrection Act just for exercising their constitutionally protected rights. It basically turns America into a dictatorship. All of this is real, and all of this is happening. And yes, not enough is being done against it. And yes, unfortunately, this fact remains true, as I've been saying since the start of Gaslit Nation. Grassroots power is the most reliable power we have left. So if you are terrified by what you are hearing, go to gaslitnationpod.com, go to the action guide, go to the 2024 survival guide, chip in where you can, help where you can, get involved where you can, make sure you have a community where you are, make sure you are active and engaged in your community. You're going to need those folks should the worst happen and Trump wins on November 5th, 2024. Okay, God forbid, since God is the theme of this week's episode, the abuse and misuse of what God really should mean if you are a thinking person, if you are a philosopher, if you are somebody who is empathy driven, if you are somebody that loves Star Wars, what you're about to hear is not about actual Christians. If you actually study the teachings of Christ, what you're about to hear is a cynical, cutthroat quest for power that is deeply funded and well organized and has a lot of advanced targeting technology to drive out the vote and harvest support and mind hack people behind it. It's very sophisticated, this operation. It goes deep. So now, without further ado, meet Stephen Ujlaki, the filmmaker behind the must-watch documentary Bad Faith, out April 26th, which you can pre-order now. And please get your friends together and organize watch parties of Bad Faith. Now here's the trailer.
Everything can be reduced to right and wrong. Make no mistake about it. We are talking about Christianizing America.
That which God has given us, we will allow no one to take away.
The
Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade.
So happy! That's a blessing!
We will make America great again.
It's time for us, people, to come out of the churches!
Christian nationalism uses religion to justify all kinds of evil.
Christian nationalism has been a political tool for centuries.
It has nothing to do with Christianity. It's about power and politics.
The goal was to enshrine Christian identity as the law of the land.
To reclaim the United States for God.
You can't take over society unless you take over the 7 pillars, and they've gone one by one to do it.
We want total war.
We are the Christian Taliban. We need to force the people to believe what we believe.
When government is in the hands of godly men, it is good. But in the hands of all others, it is evil.
So, Stephen, you and I, earlier when we had met, you were saying how the Vietnam War had a big impact on you after you came back from Europe, working in French filmmaking, working in the French filmmaking industry, working with heavyweights there, that when you came back to the US, the moment of idealism coming out of civil rights and the anti-war movement had all sort of turned into cynicism and national depression. And so could you just start up there? Because all this stuff's really fascinating to me. Like, so what did you decide to do in that horrible moment in American history?
I was disillusioned about the political consciousness of the country falling apart after the war was over. And so I went to Hollywood. And I thought, okay, let me try to make docs here. But nobody was interested. They asked, why would I ever bother? I realized that the entire system is built on agents and managers and lawyers, and nobody makes any money on docs. They're in the entertainment industry, not the information. But I spent many years in Hollywood, having a career at HBO, working for Michael Douglas and other people. And then I went into academia about 25 years ago, and I got some money from a donor, created a thing called the Doc Film Institute with Tom Luddy, and we started honoring people like Lee Koch, Pennebaker, Fred Weisman, Ken Burns, and Tavernier, and others, and then made a doc about a Cuban musician called Cachao. Then I became dean, and while dean, Trump was elected. And then I couldn't do anything about it, but 2 years later, when I was no longer dean, I started working on the documentary. And I back to my roots in a way that I thought, okay, if ever the country needed documentaries to highlight areas that are being overlooked, this was the time. So that's what happened. That's how I got into it. That was about 5.5 years ago.
What did you know about Christian nationalism before getting started on the film?
I knew very little. I was essentially focusing on the evangelicals. I knew that they were the reason that Trump had won, and I wondered how was it possible that he had such overwhelming support from them. And so I started reading books. I read Catherine Stewart's book, The Power Worshippers. I read Michelle Goldberg's book, The Kingdom Coming. I read Sam Perry's book, Taking America Back for God, and discovered about Christian nationalism. And then I read Anne's book, which gave me the whole underneath of the story, not just what was going on the surface. So I learned about Christian nationalism little by little. And then at that time, when I was trying to interview people like Franklin Graham, they were completely in denial about the fact that it existed. They said it was a liberal fantasy. And of course, now, 5+ years later, they're proudly announcing that they're Christian nationalists. But so that the country has become so much more radicalized in the last 5 or 6 years, I had to shift the focus of the documentary several times in order not to get left behind. So I learned a lot. I mean, I learned a lot about Christian nationalism, what it was, what it wasn't. And the documentary has a lot of information, but I'm also hoping that it also cuts things very short. And my hope was that it would inspire people to look further into certain areas, because I only touched on, but the essential roots of it, the fact that Christian nationalism is based on white supremacy and racism, that it's always had a different cover story to explain, in order to maintain and propagate itself. And we are now in a situation where The fact that this formerly fringe group within the Republican Party has taken over the Republican Party, it's now far more powerful. People wonder, why is it more powerful now than it was several years ago? It's because they took over a legacy political party and now have all that behind them. And the fruit of their 40 years of working at the state and local levels is paying off. And the fruit of their investments in the Leadership Institute and all the other organizations that have been actually indoctrinating people into a certain party line and how to talk about it, the very thing they're accusing the left of doing. I mean, it's all been massive indoctrination for the last 40 plus years, paying off now.
During the process of making the film, what shocked you the most?
What shocked me the most was the realization that the weakening of the democratic institutions, the attempt to actually destroy democracy, was part of the plan. It wasn't you can look around and say, look what's happened to this country. People distrust our institutions. The country's deeply divided. And you could think it's happenstance or just simply these things happen in history. No, it turns out that when Weyrich realized that he was never going to accomplish a Christian nation because he would always be a minority, he had to sidestep democracy. Democracy was an obstacle in the way. And frankly, democracy has always been the enemy for these extremists because they say that it's counter to the will of God, at least as they understand the will of God. So the fact that flat out they were saying that this was how they were going to get to power, that shocked me. But at the same time, it gave the film such focus because there's a through line. And the through line is from kind of the mayhem of what's going on January 6th, then looking back and seeing how everything led to that and to the aftermath of that. It gave a really strong through line, knowing that there was the intentionality of these people to accomplish this all along. It wasn't like bumbling in the dark. No, they were very focused.
And could you tell our audience, who is Weyrich? What role does he play in all this?
Well, Paul Weyrich was a Republican operative who initially worked for Goldwater and was devastated at Goldwater's loss. I mean, he was crushed in 1964. And he set about trying to figure out how to get the Republicans, to make the Republicans more competitive. He was also constantly creating these institutions. Like he co-founded the Heritage Foundation, which is alive and doing extremely well today. That was in 1973, so 50 plus years later. But he was the one who decided that the way to get more power for the Republican Party was to cultivate the evangelicals. The evangelicals had stayed away from politics ever since the Scopes trial, when they humiliated them. They were treated as country bumpkins and ignoramuses because they believed in creationism and they believed in a bunch of things that the mainstream didn't believe in.
Well, what's the Scopes trial?
The Scopes trial was a trial in which, in the late 1920s, in which a school teacher, I believe in Tennessee, was put on trial for teaching evolution. And this outraged those people who believed, whose faith told them that the world was actually created in 6,000 years. And that this was because it was, what he was teaching was against what the Bible said. So they were outraged. There was a trial, Clarence Darrow on one side and O'Brien, William Jennings Bryan on the other, two giants. And they were shown up to be, again, the fact that they were so much against the modern spirit of science that they were stuck in these beliefs that they believed for hundreds of years. They felt that what they said was the public square was the playground of the devil, and the only place they were safe was in their churches and amongst themselves. They were really a subculture. And Weyrich was able to pry them loose by promising their leaders all sorts of wealth and advantages and political influence if they could convince their followers to vote Republican. And the way they decided to do that was to say to their followers, and of course these people believed blindly, I would say, the evangelicals, and that their leader spoke the word from God. They said, you've got to vote Republican because it's the party of God. The Democratic Party is the party of the devil. So they came up with this as a way to get their followers to vote Republican. The incredible irony is that this is repeated verbatim to this day, and it's considered an article of faith among tens of millions of Americans. And it was only a device that was used in order to get the followers who were apolitical to actually vote and to vote Republican. The other crazy thing that happened was that the real reason the evangelical leaders wanted to get involved was because they wanted to defend their segregated academies, Christian academies. And with the Brown versus Board of Education, they were no longer going to claim tax-exempt status. And that enraged them and made them feel that they had to turn that around. Now, that was the real reason. But Weyrich very cleverly came up with a better rallying cry. And that was defending the rights of the unborn, something he made up. He was a Catholic, and so he knew the Catholics, conservative Catholics, were against abortion. The evangelicals had never had any problems with it. The Southern Baptist Convention in 1973, after Roe versus Wade, that decision, they applauded that decision. Falwell didn't talk against abortion for 5 years. It was only after there was a deal to be made that they changed their tune, and abortion became the so-called reason why they had to go to the polls and what they had to defend. It's a scam on a massive level that was incredibly successful. Both the rallying cry and the divisiveness in the country that it caused, all because they're trying to make a political deal and trying to bring strength to the Republican Party, try to make it competitive. And of course, the irony of all this is that eventually the Republican Party did not satisfy his extremism, and so they took it over, starting with the Tea Party. So it's an incredible story that people don't seem to fully understand. People know bits and pieces of it, but the fact that it's also coherent, that's the part that shocks people.
What role do American billionaires play in this?
Well, I mean, the reality is we live in a plutocracy. So they play a very big part. They have more votes than anyone, many more. So they have been, what Weyrich did in order to fund the Council for National Policy, which is a big part of Ann Nelson's book, was to go to these oil and gas billionaires and say to them, look, if you fund us, we will politically support the deregulation and the no to low taxes that you want. And a number of them were not particularly religious, but at the same time, they were very happy to have as cover for their own economic interests this cultural issue that Weyrich and his group provided. Koch ran for a libertarian in 1980 on this platform, extremist platform, and got almost no votes, and realized, okay, that's not going to work. And so they then decided to team up and fund groups that would essentially be pushing their interests, but under the cover of something, of a cultural issue that had a lot more appeal than simply helping him make more money. The oil and gas billionaires have been able to exercise a great deal of influence in our country. And of course, they don't do it directly, although now what we're finding out is it's getting much more direct in terms of the supporting Trump. But it used to be under cover of issues that were supposedly not related to their own economic well-being.
Right. They were waging culture wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And abortion was their number one culture war.
Yeah.
And once you overturn abortion with Roe v. Wade, you need new culture wars to feed the people.
Right.
And then you're going to go after women's right to vote because a woman belongs in the kitchen as a baby-making vessel. And they were very clear about that with who the Republican Party chose to respond to the State of the Union. That was Katie Britt out of Alabama in her kitchen with her big diamond cross around her neck. So I want to ask you, did you come across Russia or any sort of intersections with Russia or sentiment about Russia in your research?
Well, what I did discover is that way back even in the 80s, that these extremists were reaching out to strongmen in Eastern Europe, that they were really fascinated by communism. I mean, it's crazy because, of course, as you know, the Republicans always used to be fiercely prided themselves on being the most anti-communist party, and that the Democrats were weak on that. But you found that this fringe actually was fascinated by some Eastern European strongmen, and I can't remember that. And Hungarians in particular, a Hungarian fascist, and I'm blocking his name, you probably know it, who had a great deal of appeal for them, because when they realized that, again, that democracy was not working for them, the strongman had a great deal of appeal to them. The strongman who could get things done. So this was 40 plus years ago. And again, this is not, so it's not, so the interest in strongmen now, again, it's not anything new. It's just it's more out in the open now that they're in a stronger position and they feel they can promote themselves more openly. But that's the reason. If you take away democracy, if you manage to destroy it because you've created fears and concerns about the validity of elections, what's left? What's left? And that's what they've been so successful doing. And that's this other story that I don't think gets enough play. And I know something you're also working on, and that is how you get to the point where the public feels that a strong man is necessary. Well, they've been planting the seeds for this all along, because what's left once you take democracy out of the picture? How are people going to get what they want? How are they going to get what they want?
And their culture wars that they engineer create so much chaos, division, that you need a strong man to come to restore order.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, and this is another revelation, if you will, that I had when making the film. Everything ties together because everything that's happened benefits what they eventually want. That, to me, is the power of the film. And it's a thing that it's just remarkable how it all fits together. I mean, the hardest part for me in a way was to realize, wait a minute, these people had no interest in democracy. Most Americans feel, gee, we Americans, we believe in democracy. Well, guess what? There's a sizable group that don't. And the media don't like to talk about that in the same way that they don't like to talk about anything they think has religious tones because they want to stay away from it. So these groups also get the benefit of that cover for supposedly being religious, which is complete nonsense.
How big would you say they are? What are their numbers? I've read some estimates that 90 to 100 million of Americans are evangelicals, but how big would you say their numbers are that are really the core of this?
That's very hard to say. According to people like Sam Perry, a sociologist who does a lot of studies on this, at least as of a couple of years ago, I think he said there were 60 to 70 million evangelicals. We know that they've lost members because the young people are leaving the church because a number of them are fed up with the fact that it's become so political. It has nothing to do with God or Jesus. I would imagine that there may be 80 million evangelicals, 80 to 90, but the majority are not Christian nationalists. The majority of Christians are not Christian nationalists. Now, in terms of amongst the evangelicals, it's a higher, I take that back. I think amongst evangelicals, they may be a majority who are Christian nationalists. Amongst Christians, they're a minority.
Mm-hmm, right, because when you look at how evangelicals vote, they vote overwhelmingly Republican.
Yeah, which doesn't always necessarily equate that they're Christian nationalists, but more and more it is clearly there's been an upswing. And now I think I pretty confidently can say that the majority of evangelicals are Christian nationalists. Now, a couple of evangelicals that we wanted to get the film to, because a lot of the more progressive or even middle of the road pastors want to show the film because their congregations have become so enamored Trump. They are, and they're losing their congregation. If they don't toe the line, their congregations fire them. It's a very, very tricky position because what you have essentially is the leaders are the grassroots have become radicalized, and they are leading more than they're ostensible leaders. And then, of course, on top of that are the people pulling the strings, the billionaires, and the political operatives of the people, the CNP, who are feeding the pastors the languages and the sermons that they want them to say. And that's been so successful that the followers have become totally, they've been drinking the Kool-Aid. And many of the pastors have lost control of their flocks, of their congregations. And we are getting it before some evangelical groups, and also some Black evangelicals. We went to a conference at Yale, Reverend Barber. But the issue of several times they have said they do not want to show the film because the film implies that all evangelicals are Christian nationalists. And they're saying that's not true. But regrettably, more and more of them are. But it's one of those harsh truths that a number of the leaders don't want to acknowledge.
You mentioned CNP, the Council for National Policy. Who are some prominent members of the CNP?
Well, the amazing thing is that of the three founders, Morton Blackwell, Richard Viguerie, and Paul Weyrich, two of them are still alive. Weyrich died in December of 2008, but Blackwell and Viguerie was a direct male genius. Blackwell is the guy who founded the Leadership Institute, and they're still alive and well. I mean, it's incredible. And they've been so successful, when you understand how so many of these people are operating in lockstep and say the same thing and use the same language. Well, what we say in the film, over several 100,000 people have gone through the Leadership Institute. They're told what phrases to use. They're told what sounds innocuous, but is still advancing the cause step by step. So they are an army. They are an army in preparation. And, it's just a question of what it's going to take. And it obviously, come election time, we'll find out. That's the scary part. They have been so indoctrinated and so inculcated. And of course, what has made it powerful has been that supposedly they're doing God's will. And that's the most insidious part of Christian nationalism. That's what gives it its power. That's why leaders, like whether it's Putin or Orban or others, shield themselves, align themselves with the church and their countries to give themselves that credibility.
What role did they play in the violent attempted overthrow of our democracy on January 6th?
Well, I would call them the foot soldiers. Not so much the leaders, but those who were ready to jump in. Although there were a number of pastors there, and in fact, Pastor Ken, who's in our film, and a number of other pastors were there, but they didn't necessarily go into the Capitol. But I mean, it played a large role. When as Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove says in the film, they've been over the years been told that they need to take back the country for God, and they felt. In fact, Hodges, one of the people who was injured, in the Capitol Jan 6th event, when he testified before Congress, he said these terrorists perceive themselves to be Christians. He said, like, shocked that they thought they were doing God's work. So they played a very important role, as I say, as the foot soldiers. Of course, you had QAnon, you have Proud Boys, some of the other extremist groups that we know about that were paramilitary. So it was a number of different groups, but the Christian nationalists were the ones that were the most controllable because their pastors controlled them, and their pastors were controlled by the leaders also, like Ralph Reed, and then, the number of people who were very powerful in the extreme right. And they are just ready to do the bidding of their leaders. They believe that they are in a holy war, and they believe that the country has fallen into the hands of the devil. All this stuff that you think is simply hyperbole, no, they believe it literally. That's pretty scary.
Right, and that's why so many of them believe in QAnon.
I don't know as much about the QAnon. That's something that Ann Nelson gets. There have been a couple of studies about that, the intersection, but some religious people are now falling into QAnon. And I think it's just one conspiracy after another, because, of course, I've always maintained and believed that amongst religious people, there's a tendency to believe, there's a greater tendency potentially to believe in conspiracies because of faith, that they have faith and a belief in something which is unknown, which is unseen, And therefore, if you tell them, okay, this other unknown and unseen thing is true, they could jump potentially from that one belief into another belief, all based, again, on conspiracies. I don't know how true that is. I was originally, when I started doing research, I thought I would do it on conspiracies. But then I realized that wasn't broad enough, and there's conspiratorial thinking on the left as well. That didn't really cover it. So I don't know that much about QAnon, except that it's growing and it gets a lot of its appeal. It has a certain appeal to people who have a religious background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's all this reporting on evangelicals are pushing it. Featured in your documentary, Bad Faith, is something called Project 2025. What is that?
Project 2025, which is a 900-page document put up by the Heritage Foundation, which was, of course, co-founded by Weyrich in 1973, but still alive and doing well, basically spells out how they would turn our form of government into a strongman government, make the presidency having the power of a strongman with the departments, and whether it's the justice or the FBI or whatever, all dependent upon him. No more career civil servants. You have to be a loyalist. The thing that's interesting about 2025 is that it's in a direct line with the Weyrich manifesto that we show in the film that Weyrich put together in the early 2000s. That was more about how to weaken and destroy democracy, how to weaken, create distrust in institutions. We have to use guerrilla tactics. Now, that was how to take it apart. Project 2025 is, okay, this is how we would reassemble it. This is what it would look like when we come to power. And it's a blueprint for a strongman government.
And it's larger than Trump. They just want to get one of their people in there. And Trump is the one that they're placing all their chips on. What do they see in Donald Trump?
Well, that's another question a lot of people have had. And they had we give pretty much of an answer to it in the film. Everybody knows that any claim on his part to be religious is a joke. And in fact, as Elizabeth Newman talks about, and she's a conservative evangelical, she says how a lot of people had a lot of contempt and disdain for him. But then it turned out that she heard from these Pentecostalists who were, I forget her name, his faith advisor, Paula White, I think, it's a Pentecostalist prosperity preacher, claimed that he'd found Jesus and that he had become a Christian. And so that maybe didn't do much, but it started. And then somebody had the realization that this was in the Bible. Sometimes God uses pagans to accomplish his goals. And so King Cyrus has come up. King Cyrus was somebody who did good things for the Jews, even though he was a pagan. And the idea is that Trump was King Cyrus. And Elizabeth says many, many people in the evangelical community got very excited about this because they felt that they were living out the prophecies. I mean, I can't tell you how upsetting it is for me to realize how gullible a lot of these people are and how they can fall for this. Now, of course, you could say they were trying to come up with some reason to justify their backing him. Now, the thing that clinched the deal, of course, for their leaders, because the leaders weren't quite so gullible, was the fact that Trump promised that he would appoint
anti-abortion judges, which he did. He packed the Supreme Court with them.
And that list that had been provided him by Leonard Leo, and we don't get into Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society because it's just a film. I mean, there's so many things we could have gotten into. But Trump went about saying, okay, what do these people want? Whatever they want, I'll give them whatever they want for the support. And that was the main thing that everybody said, okay, the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, turning that around, had been a goal of the extreme right. I mean, not just Roe versus Wade, but Brown versus Board of Education. You've got to go back to the fact that they're against integration, a lot of them. They think segregation is biblical. I mean, they don't talk about this part of it, but it's white supremacists. Again, they're very clever about not talking about things that would alarm people. They're very, very good at making sure that it's something that that seems to be like a reasonable and even a humane position, even though they know it to be complete bullshit, but at least the leaders. So, yeah.
They love the culture war, targeting LGBTQ plus people, especially trans people. Like, that's one of their latest weapons, culture war weapons that they're wielding against us. In the documentary Bad Faith, you feature some pastors. You show footage of them being terrifying, right?
Yeah.
And so when you interviewed these folks, how were they towards you? Like, you came from godless Hollywood, so they must have known that you had some sort of like left-wing agenda here. So how did they treat you when you were collecting your interviews?
Well, a number of them would not meet with us. We did have Pastor Ken, who we have a lot of footage on him. I wish we could show more, but he made his name in Oregon, I think in Portland, and he would go to Planned Parenthood centers and he would block women from coming in. And they would do prayers there. They would pray over them and block them from coming in. And they got a lot of notoriety for that. Then he ended up branching out and he started a church in Lenoir outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And he wanted whatever publicity he could get. I mean, again, because of COVID, we did not interview personally a lot of these people. We hired local crews and we interviewed them remotely, but the local crews are the ones who actually were there filming. So that's what happened in that particular case. And as far as how we would be treated, I mean, there were a number of people who absolutely refused to meet with us, like a Franklin Graham, or people who were smart enough to know that there was no good that was going to come out of that. But a guy like Ken Peters, who was starting a new church and, who was quite confident that the message, he wanted to get his message out, however it was going to happen. So that's where we had access to him. And of course, the other evangelicals that we had access to were on the liberal progressive side, who did not, the anti-Trump evangelicals. But we did not get, other than Pastor Ken and a few people that we got, like Greg Locke and others that we picked up footage from. There's a lot of archival work in the film. It's really like a compilation film in a lot of ways. I mean, we did a huge number of our own interviews, but the history of it is obviously all using archival footage.
Yeah, and you see them proclaiming proudly that they're the Christian Taliban. They put that label on themselves.
Yeah. No, they are at the point of feeling that they're going to win, that there's nothing that can stop them. And so they are very proudly proclaiming that. And what's smart about that, in a way, is that that's appealing to certain people who think, gee, I want to be with a winner. I mean, what I was going to say before about the culture wars, when they choose to be against the rights of certain people, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's trans or others, they know that the Democrats are going to be defending those people, thus, from their point of view, falling into a trap and alienating a certain number of voters. Because the reality is, the majority of the country, even if they are, not, let's say, left or right, but say in the middle, are not necessarily fully on board with all the progress that's been made in the civil rights of everybody in this country. I mean, we have to acknowledge that. And so therefore, the Democrats, by defending them, they are alienating, unfortunately, they are alienating segments of the country that are not fully on board. And the Republicans can take full advantage of that. And I don't know what the answer is to that. You may have some ideas, but it's a terrible problem. You're torn between your principles and also you're trying to win an election, and you're dealing with incredibly unscrupulous people. And so what can you do to actually even improve your chances? Because the other side is not really playing in the same way. It's like you have a team and one team plays by the rules, the other doesn't. So who's more likely to win that?
Well, the answer is to abolish electoral college, because that's what gives them the advantage. And that's what makes their culture war so effective, because you just have to win over just like a handful of 1,000 votes here, 1,000 votes there. And Donald Trump lost 2020 just by 44,000 votes spread across 3 states.
Yeah. No, I know that. I mean, that's the other thing, again, we could talk about, and that is that it's very clear that democracy is not working today.
Well, electoral college isn't democracy by design.
Part of it. That part of it that the founders put in place to protect against the tyranny of the majority has now become the tool to create the tyranny of the minority. And that's why you're absolutely right. The Electoral College would be one thing that could single-handedly change the complexion and would be a true mirror of the will of the people of this country.
Yeah. So against this long game by the far right, I've interviewed you, Ann Nelson, whose book, The Shadow Network, was one of the guides for your film, and Nancy McLean, who wrote Democracy in Chains. And in all these conversations, it's clear the Democrats had no answer to this far-right long game. There was never a Democratic long game to protect our democracy. And in fact, the 2018 Big Blue Wave has been playing catch-up ever since. And it's really down to the grassroots groups like States Project, Sister District, Indivisible, and others and Run for Something to try to counter this on the all-important local level, which they've saturated for decades, 40 years plus. So would you agree to that? Like there's no real long game answer to this and that we're playing catch-up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They completely, I mean, we know, and I didn't really know this, that Obama did not pay attention to the infrastructure of the Democratic Party. There's been a complacency. Of course, it used to be the strength of labor unions. Labor unions went no longer what they were.
Yeah, they're destroyed by the oligarchs.
They destroyed them. Started with Reagan. I mean, my feeling is that starting in 1980, you had the shift in the pendulum. Basically, everything that's happened since then has been bad for the Democrats. The Democrats have not been able to figure out how to solve it, other than you had, if you will, a charismatic Bill Clinton and charismatic Obama that won. But in terms of everything else, there was no real work done on the sort of the Democratic Party figuring out how do we deal with the changing economy, changing demographics. And then they kept counting on the fact that certain people were theirs and they did not have to cultivate them. And they also did not deliver on the reforms. They didn't deliver what I would consider part of social democracy, because I don't think you can have a real democracy if you don't also have the government reining in the corporations and supporting people who need help. Instead, you have a situation, you have like a jungle, laissez-faire capitalism from the 19th century that still exists in this country, and it's causing the ruin of the country, in my opinion. And no, there's no long game, and that's really unfortunate. And because if Trump comes to power, they're going to be even, I don't even want to think about it, but it's a certain potential outcome that everybody needs to understand is very, very possible. Very possible. I don't know how you feel about it, but
1,000,000,000%. I'm at the point where I'm going through the emotions now on it, so I can be alert and ready come November 6th, the day after Election Day, November 5th, for when the worst should happen.
Well, you've written books about this. I mean, you've written about, what happens in totalitarian companies. You know what happens with dictators. I mean, that's part of the thing. Americans are so unable to understand that there's nothing special about this country. This can happen anywhere. They are not aware of the fact that they don't know their history. They don't know their Constitution. For whatever reason, they stopped teaching civics in class, and they didn't realize that they have a role to play in a democracy, not just sort of bystanders and watching what the various pundits or the news media are saying about the horse race. I mean, it's very, very depressing, because it's hard for me to see how this is going to get turned around. I mean, we're still X number of months away, so it could be, and there's hope that Trump will continue to be, as he becomes more and more outrageous, that he will alienate more people. But you can't bet on the other side fucking up. How are you going to win? And I haven't seen that yet.
Why does it seem the average American seems unaware of just how close we are to losing everything and becoming a dictatorship?
I think that it has to do with the fact that there haven't been any foreign invasions, except in 1812. You have had, after the Vietnam War, the short answer is that they have existed in a kind of a happy land where nothing terrible has happened. Things have happened, but nothing catastrophic. So there, for example, Ukraine, which is like, I can't even bear to read the newspaper anymore until that Johnson actually somehow, somebody gets him to give aid to them. So there was a thinking that if people saw what happened in Ukraine, they would get some understanding of what it could be like to be invaded and to be turned into a totalitarian country. I mean, there they had managed to escape it, and now they were being in danger once again. The answer is that people, they don't know history. Young kids, and I teach, don't follow the news or the politics and don't seem to feel that it's important to them. And I think that it's a fault of our educational system. And it's, for some reason, everything has become entertainment. What's real? They don't even follow the real news. They all have influencers. One of my projects in class was to make them read actual sources, for weeks and then write about it, and it was kind of a different experience for them. And then the national media does not help at all by normalizing what's going on. The way the New York Times has treated Trump has been outrageous. And then there's the equal sides notion of the networks. I mean, the reason that my film would never get on television, people said, is that it's too much taking a side. And I say, wait a minute, this is just the history. This is actually what happened. You say, well, it's too much in your face. There's no even attempt to make it seem like the other side has a point of view. I say, well, the other side doesn't have any. There is nothing valid about their side. It's a combination, like bad education, bad information, and people lulled to sleep by a country that has had an incredible period of time. When I graduated from high school, I went to Jesuit schools, and I was a big fan I was classics, Latin and Greek, and I was a big fan of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So I said my generation was going to witness the decline and fall of the American Empire. I said this in 1961. And I've just been shocked that it's taken so long, partially because the USSR fell first, and then came back as Putin. Things don't last forever, and Americans don't seem to be aware about how tenuous the grasp is on that which has made America great. That's all I can say. They do not realize that there's very little that separates us from a totalitarian country. And that's kind of what you've been writing about. It's how do you get that through?
You just keep putting it in front of them again and again. And so I am going to encourage all of my listeners to host a bad faith watch party where you get together with family and friends, take a picture, send it to me, send me a letter, I'll read it on the show. And in exchange for organizing a bad faith watch party of this essential must-watch documentary, I'll send you some Gaslit Nation merchandise and some other fun things, all right? That is a direct challenge to my listeners to get out there, host your bad faith watch parties, and then go to the Gaslit Nation 2024 Survival Guide and sign up for some actions you can take there, starting right now to help protect our democracy in 2024 and beyond.
I think that's great. I mean, one of our goals, and we on our badfaithdocumentary.com on our website, is that for hosting a screening, we tell you who to call, how to contact. We're also doing everything we can to encourage screenings of people in different parts of the country, to create a screening from expensive if it's in a wealthy organization, but really just, $100 if it's not. We want this to get out to as many people as possible. And every screening that we've had, people come up to me afterwards and say, you've got to get this out so everyone can see it. Because when they've seen things and understood things that they never did before, they said, you know what, maybe if other people saw this, they might feel differently. So thank you for that. I think that is a really good idea, what you're suggesting. And that's what needs to be done. The film was made to be educational. The film was made to actually motivate people to act. And so I thank you for your follow-up on this. And I really do. And I know you've been on this for some time.
Thank you so much. This election is here and it's happening. And it's bigger than Biden. We have the chance to hack away at corruption at the root by building our power at the all-important state level, where crucial quality of life issues, from voting rights to environmental protections to LGBTQ+ rights and more, are decided. Karl Rove ran the same strategy for the GOP during the Obama years, laying the groundwork for Trump to come to power in 2016. Now we're reversing this dangerous trend, securing key victories in swing states to protect our elections and advance progressive laws in states like Michigan and Wisconsin. Yes, even Wisconsin. Another world is possible when we unite and build together. Here's how. Join me, Andrea, at State Fair, a giving circle that collects small dollar donations among friends and family to build big power in key states. If 1,000 Gaslit Nation listeners set up a $5 recurring monthly donation, that's $5,000 we're sending to turn so-called red states purple and so-called purple states blue. Some of the races we've supported won by only a few votes. And we flipped the House in Pennsylvania, flipped the entire House, all right? Elected like 12 new people, massive. And they have a extra crazy Republican Party in Pennsylvania. And that's what we did together through States Project. Thank you. Your $5 monthly donation will make a huge difference. Join me and my friends at State Fair today. You can sign up at gaslitnationpod.com. Just click on the 2024 Survival Guide on our homepage. Step number 2, are there any young people in your life, Gen Z or younger? Give them the gift of the excellent book, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. It helps people of all ages run for office. So if you're thinking of running for office, be sure to read this inspiring and practical guide. Both the book and the organization, Run for Something, encourage, recruit, and train young people to run for office and flex their power. Inspire a young person and anyone you love and trust with empathy in their hearts and science in their minds to run for office today. Number 3, help the helpers. State Bridges is a sister district action network program in which volunteers from across the country fundraise for organizations doing year-round power building in key battleground states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. State Bridges supports organizations engaging communities underrepresented at the polls, like mothers of color, rural voters, and Latinx voters. Sign up to attend a virtual fundraiser and donate to help the helpers at State Bridges. Number 4, write letters to voters in swing districts with Vote Forward. Check out any of their easy letter writing campaigns that have already started and write letters as you listen to Gaslit Nation. We'll be keeping you company. Most importantly, number 5, check your own voter registration now at election protection site vote.org. Make sure you're registered and check in with your family and friends to confirm their voter registration too. Commit to helping 5 people in your life make a plan to vote and bring them along to a Gaslit Nation phone bank this fall, because the only ones coming to save us is us. Grassroots power is the most reliable power we have left. Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level and higher on Patreon at patreon.com/gaslit. Support the essential work of the World Central Kitchen, whose aid workers were killed in Gaza trying to feed Palestinians trapped there in the famine genocide deliberately engineered by Israel's government. Give what you can to donate.wck.org. That's donate.wck.org. Contact your reps in Congress and demand a permanent ceasefire now, and that they release a public statement if they haven't already, demanding an end to Netanyahu and his coalition of terrorists' genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. To get Ukraine urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To help civilians and refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon-exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Lily Wachowski, Work for Better, Prep for Trouble, John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Larry Gasson, David Collier, Ann Bertino, David East, Ida, Joseph Mara Jr., Mark, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, Trigve, D.L. Singfield, Nicole Spear, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Ann Marshall, and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.